but it's the ability to bring those voters with you.
It's complicated and you don't need to worry about it.
It's been very well canvassed that as a party, we don't think the way that Darlene acted was in line with our values and principles.
I really had to think about, how am I going to change things up? How am I going to get through this? Because I don't want to fail.
It is foul and personal and violent.
Job is to make sure that we're showing New Zealanders that there is an alternative to the divisive approach of this government, that you can bring people together.
I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now.
When you've got a country that's got a young population but they don't get involved, you might want to have a grown-up chat about that.
We don't want a situation where government dictates the local government, but you want to make sure the system is set up so that it's easy for communities to make a decision.
I'd be really interested to see if the officials that advise that a Crown Observer was necessary or should be put in place, or whether he's made that judgment call himself.
I don't think we did, and I've said this, I don't think, because it happened quite quickly last time, I don't know that we did a good enough job of bringing the public with us.
Remember, just by having Maori Wars doesn't guarantee that mana whenua are going to be represented around the table.
Suggests that whānau with a disability and those who care and support them are somehow grifters.
Hello there, good evening. My microphone just started to wobble on me. It's great timing. How is you tonight, Blake?
I am fine. Been an interesting week.
Yes, it has. Lots of ups and downs and all sorts of things going on.
For the both of us, before anyone else. But anyway.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's a reason why my doctor yesterday was like, you need to take a holiday. Your blood pressure is way too high. I'm like, yeah, I'll do that in a couple of weeks. Yeah. Super easy.
We've got a fun one for you. Oh, sorry.
I say, yeah, let's do some housekeeping. Couple of quick things. People can pop things in the chat. That's super easy. If they've got any questions for Geoff, they're more than welcome to plonk them in there. The interview with Shannon is a pre-record, though, so you're more than welcome to ask questions, but he's not going to answer them directly tonight, but he might later, because he does come back and watch these things from time to time. We're running a poll at the moment on YouTube. Really simple poll. Have you submitted for the RSB bill yet? Because there is only 10 days left open for submissions. So, have you done your submission, Blake?
No. I too complicated for me, that one. But I will do it. Yeah.
It's all right. 10 days. Plenty of time to get it sorted.
Are you doing one?
I will be, yes. It's one of my missions to get it done over this weekend. I've decided, because, David Seymour thinks we're all bots, it has to be personalized. I'm going to start off talking about the death plant in Indonesia. It's a plant that flowers once every 10 years in the deepest jungles of Indonesia, and it smells like rotting flesh. It's said to have the worst smell on the entire planet, and this bill stinks more than that.
You might get to see one soon.
He'll probably sit there going, well, no, obviously, this is clearly ChatGPT. Right, do you want to introduce our guest?
So, yes. So, as aforementioned, later on, we've got Shannon coming on for a pre-record, but first, here is Porirua City Councillor Geoff Hayward.
I decided to go for slightly more upbeat, less like doom and gloom dramatic music for this one.
Yeah. No, not so gloom and doom. Welcome, Geoff, to the mad world of
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So,
Porirua, beautiful place. Can't say I've been there for a while myself. You've got council elections coming up this year. So obviously the first thing I tell people is, if they haven't already, they need to make sure that their details on the elections is all up to date. The Electoral Commission has your details. Postal ballot. Do you guys do STV or first past the post?
We're an STV election, so it's all about numbers, making sure you put the number next to the appropriate candidate.
Excellent. October 11 is election day this year. Nominations open on July the 5th?
4th or 3rd? Somewhere in there, yeah.
It's one of them. I don't know. I'm out of the country at the time. I'm hiding on purpose. And then voting forms will come out early or late August, I think it is. and it's all postal ballot. So people need to get up to date with these things beforehand. Tell me about water.
Yeah, it's a big issue. It's hardly the most sexy thing when people think about local government, whenever they do, I suppose. But it has been an issue that's been, a big part of the last 5-6 years that I've been on council. Where I live in Titahi Bay, I'm just down the road from the beach. And so for me, one of those marker points as to how well our water service delivery is done is whether or not the wastewater treatment plant, which is just on the other side of the bay, is operating effectively, especially on days like we've had this week, really heavy rain, and the water, no matter where it comes from, ends up through every crack and hole in the private and public network and ends up at those locations. That's the consequence of 40 years of underinvestment.
It's not a sexy topic. I was talking to, many years ago, former Hamilton City Mayor Margaret Evans, and she was one of these people who chose to step down. She knew when she was going to be leaving. She didn't lose her election, and she decided that was the year, that was the term that they were going to finally focus on pipes, because every other year it's not seen, it's not sexy. People don't like to see the money spent on that kind of stuff. Over the last couple of years, we've seen a whole bunch of noise around water management. We had obviously Three Waters that came in. We saw the Taxpayers Union and Groundswell team up and do their anti-Three Waters thing because co-governance bad. And now you've got Local Water Done Well coming through, which is what the National Party and the coalition are pushing. The prices on that are looking to be more expensive than the prices would have been on Three Waters, but you can't do bugger all about it. How do you, as a council, go and ensure the protection of what's really a taonga? It's a huge asset for your region. So what can be done to protect your interests in that?
So there's the first thing to say is that the current legislation isn't really too prescriptive around that space, right? And it leads you to wonder whether or not central government, does really, have a concern about how these measures, these reforms, are actually going to affect people in their own households. And you are right. The current regime, Local Water Done Well, is going to not yield the kind of efficiencies that the previous, the Labour's plan was going to do. It was a rather toxic, backlash that was based not on the merits of the issue around our infrastructure breaking down, because if it was about that, then we would all understand exactly as you said, Paul, how important the water is as a taonga, and the value that you put from the pipe, from the tap to the sink, to the drain, is in protecting that at both ends. So I think for me, and where I got to in a local context, is that you need to actually provide an actual document that confirms what every person who uses water, whether it's in Porirua or part of a wider Wellington region, has. And that's what I think is best described as a water charter.
Why did you decide to go for something a bit more independent than the status quo? What we're seeing in the rest of the country? What would your inspiration to be a bit different?
I think part of it is that, as I said, this has been an issue that's been bounced around, between two different governments over 5 to 6 years. People are sick and tired of the whiplash. And it is, it was a complicated enough process of trying to wrestle. How do you put investment in to a system that is now so far behind? And under the status quo arrangements that we've had since 1989, they just do not work, and they will continue to fail. I mean, it comes down to this. A person who sees, on a campaign video or in a flyer saying, vote for me, I'll keep your rates low, or I'll cut rates, or I'll set rates at zero, they get elected, but then when they have to face the fact that the infrastructure is actually being undervalued, their response has been, oh, we'll just sweat it. We'll just keep that asset as it is, and we'll hope, we'll pray that it doesn't break. Well, guess what? It broke. And now we're the ones to live with the consequence of it. No matter whether you have the status quo or you've got any of the new solutions, whether it was Labour's Three Waters or this local water done well, everyone is going to have to pay for the mismanagement of 40 years, and that's just the harsh reality of it. No mechanism is going to be make you pay less. It's just going to be, this system is going to pay relatively less than what status quo is, and that's at least progress. But more important than that, Blake, where I got to from the Porirua situation is people here just want certainty. They just want certainty in really simple terms. They want to know that the services that they have are owned by the people. They want to know that they're not going to get privatised like they have in other jurisdictions. They want to know that you are actually committing to utilising local employers and local providers and local contractors to do the jobs that can be done. You want to make sure that the pricing for any water is fair. But most importantly, you want this organisation to be upfront and transparent about its decision making. And I think that the absence of trust is a real issue. And until we get that social license back with our water providers, I think we've got a big challenge coming over the next 30 years on top of the immense cost required.
Yeah. How old is the water infrastructure in the area?
So, it's interesting you say this, because part of the challenge for Porirua relative to other places, although it won't be too dissimilar from other parts of the Motu, is Porirua has had bits and pieces added on over the history, right? In Titahi Bay 100 years ago, this was a tourist destination. Very few houses. I live in a house that's basically probably one of the earlier houses of development in the bay. And that, the property is old. The house is built in the 60s, in the post-war period. We had US Marines here during the war, and then after that, a massive construction project in this area. And so you're talking about, this is before Porirua City was Porirua City Council. You've still got those old council structures. Some pipes have not even been identified correctly because they just were built at a time well before you had any kind of regulation in place. And it's harder even still for places like Wellington City because, again, they've been around even longer than we have. So in Titahi Bay, you're talking post-war. Porirua East, Cannons Creek, Waitanirua, Ranui, they're all post-war as well. You have your newer suburbs in Whitby and Aotea as well. And then obviously, as a city that still has to have a place for people to grow, we've only got one, in my view, only one greenfield site left up in Plimerton Farm. Once that's gone, we are going to have to spend even more time concentrating on the existing network, because there won't be any other places to build new whare that was once farmland. It just won't be there.
There are some places in the country, Northland jumps to mind here, where their infrastructure, their water treatment plants are coming up 90 years old. Which, it's creaking a little bit under everything. It's an area that's been hit a number of times by weather events and stuff like that. Is that an issue where you are and with your neighbours? Because as you mentioned, Wellington's been around since almost right near the signing of the treaty. So I imagine that ageing infrastructure and being so connected and so close to your neighbours, that's got to be a concern as well around how something like a charter works.
Yes, so I think that's a really good question. And it is one of the consequences of those reforms in 1989 was that they amalgamated so many councils across the country in the interests of trying to be more efficient. But it also meant that there were certain assets that were shared between councils as well. I chair the joint council between Wellington City and Porirua City for the management of two assets, one being the landfill at Spicer and the other one being the wastewater treatment plant, which is just down the road here. So that's the one body that we have some sort of ring-fenced accountability around that space. That services not just households across Porirua, but also the northern suburbs of Wellington City. So they are, inextricably linked, the fortunes of both Wellington City and Porirua. And this will be the same for many assets across the country. And let's just go back a step here for a second. Our Wai does not respect the boundaries of councils or other structures like that. The water was here before democracy. So let's be honest about how we treat that water and the use of it and where you're taking it and where you're putting it.
Water is always patient and water always wins, as a 900-year-old Gallifreyan once said.
I think like sleeping water, my friend, kind of thing. You know, water can become the cup, or it can crash like water.
Exactly.
That's a good segue to your question.
Yeah, as I say, I've got a question that's coming from a viewer here. Are you able to advise on any prospective Porirua candidates who are likely to seek election who are known to oppose fluoride in the water supply?
Good question. I don't know any at the moment. That is to say that, you know, we still got several weeks before candidates are going to come out of the woodwork. I would like to think that people would know that I am for fluoridation. Partially because of my background in biomedical sciences when I did my degrees, partially because I think it is a public health issue and it should be managed from a nationwide perspective. And so I'm glad the previous government saw it like that and actually, you know, addressed it in those terms. I understand people want to have, you know, access to water in its purest form possible. I totally get that, and He Paka Māori for me would understand that too. But we've got kids who are still struggling with poverty, and the needs of them to make sure that their dental health is enhanced is important to me, because people don't really realize this, but there's a huge amount of evidence that shows the quality of your teeth and the quality of your health are really strongly connected. If we can do something about that, we should be doing something about that.
So are you saying that you know more about this than the people who have spent 2 hours on Facebook researching? I mean, that just sounds crazy.
I will not, I can only speak for myself. I'm a person that does want to, you know, constantly learn, constantly update, constantly, you know, test my own assumptions. But ultimately, I'm also a person who respects the mana of individuals who have devoted their careers, their lives, to being qualified and experienced and working directly on the shovel in these areas. If we are choosing to ignore that, then don't come to me asking me to fix my car, because I'm not a mechanic.
I love it. It's a great analogy.
Sam's got a question before you move on. Does here. He? Paul.
What's the status of Titahi Bay Road?
Oh man! For those who know, we had a big storm today. Yeah, we had a big storm today. A couple of trees fell down. For those who know, just down by the roundabout by the mall. They've been cleared. They've been cleared since about 1:30 this afternoon. But Titahi Bay Road is such an important spine to the CBD. It connects, the east and the west. It connects Keneparu, Alston, Takapawahia, and Titahi Bay. The interesting thing about Titahi Bay Road as well is that once you get past the city centre, it's the only road in and out of Titahi Bay. You know, we've got tens of thousands of people that live there. If that road is blocked, we are all trapped there like a bag of carrots, and we can't go anywhere. I had one of my friends say, well, you could buy a boat. I said, yeah, that's great, but what about everybody else who can't,
Buy a yacht. Surely that's the answer. Big one, an ark. Get an ark. I understand that there's a couple of ferries that would be free to a good home soon.
You might be right, but and look, for those who have never been to Titahi Bay, it is awesome, and there are plenty of people who come down and use it to launch their boats or kayaks, or the surf club have their huge surf boats down there as well. It is a wonderful place to come visit. Paul, please, when you come down, come to our local cafe, have the seafood chowder. I hope you love it. But I think it's the best in the country, and I will take the Pepsi challenge on that.
Okay. Deal. I'll have to find time to get down when I get back from the doctor.
Your holiday. Yes.
So with the election campaign coming up, I'm working on the assumption that you're going to be running again.
I think it's a pretty safe assumption, eh?
Fair. What are some of the challenges that you are expecting to come across in terms of what local residents have told you over the last couple of years as big issues for them?
I mean, it's a good question. Water's still going to be a big issue. We've got a big debate that will happen before the election, which is basically what kind of solution we're going to commit to as part of a water service delivery plan. That's why getting that water charter in place before that vote is so vital for me. But even when those votes are done and then we go to the election campaign, we are still going to have to make sure that the new entity follows through on the commitments that have been made and the principles of a water charter. That's still important. And one of those things about, alarm bells in the space like water infrastructure that came too late, I'm noticing this with another issue that will affect people here in Porirua, and it's the same that's been faced across the country, and that's around solid waste. It's around the landfills and what ends up in there. Again, not a sexy issue, but when those structures fail, communities like those in Tawa who are in the other jurisdiction just to the south of us, they have to deal with the odor problems because of the landfill being too close and now becoming just no longer satisfactory in the way that we used to do it. So we need to do organic diversion at the household level. I've been proud that we council got a grant program in place for community-based activities for local efforts in building up composting and diversion of waste. That's really cool. But we're going to need to also do all the whare for which they represent a barrier to be able to participate in a meaningful way. Likewise, there's also organics is like our second largest source of waste that ends up in a landfill. The top one is still construction and demolition waste. Every time we are building new houses, the state houses that we have been building under the previous government somehow has not really replicated in the new government. I won't go on a long rant about that, but that's still an issue. That creates waste that then ends up in the landfill. We need to make sure that is being diverted as well. There are solutions around the country about that. My expectation is that our council will have a C&D diversion facility by Christmas this year, and it means that, again, we can push that stuff away from landfill. Now, those two things alone are not going to solve everything, right? But in terms of council's responsibilities, those are definitely important things. And then just equity issues, like, for instance, just to use the rubbish one, for example, we still use black plastic bags to collect our rubbish, right? Unless you use a private provider. That's not exactly the most ecologically responsible way to do it. But also, many people can't afford the $6, $7, $8 a bag a week to do that. They then have, it's unacceptable, but they are left with the conclusion that they will use the recycling bins they have right now as effectively as rubbish bins. And when one bin's contaminated, a whole day's waste is contaminated, and it can't go to the recycling facility, so that has to end up back at the dump. So it's defeating the purpose of it. We need to have a general waste bin. We need to change our glass recycling so it's working better. We need organic collection being done. We need to continue to commit to those communities around local action on waste minimisation, because they are doing great stuff. We need to be part of the solution and not part of the problem on that. And then also, we will continue to make work with central government and the commercial sector in terms of their stewardship schemes, whether it's batteries, tyres, the caps on the ends of your milk containers, to the cardboard cartons. All of those things, we need to play a role in that. And so I would expect that if we do our job properly as a community, as a council, we also expect central government and the private sector to do that as well. I haven't even started talking about the importance of having a voice for those with the direct lived challenges of accessibility, but that's also equally a challenge in terms of making sure that there is a mangai, a voice, not just as best as an able-bodied person, cis tāne Māori, I can only walk my path, and at best I'll be an ally. When we have a more representative council that has that diversity, we make better decisions.
How do you pay for it?
Sorry for...
Funding for councils is historically bad, because rating is obviously where you get your funding from. You get a little bit from developer payments and stuff like that, but it's not enough. It's quite clearly not enough all across the country. So I guess the better question, instead of how do you pay for it, because I know how you pay for it, is what could be done to make sure that rates burden isn't quite so much on everybody knowing what they're paying for. Like, are there other revenue streams that you'd like to see introduced, or other ways that council could look at raising funds. A bake sale, maybe. I'm always a big fan of those.
Yeah, I mean, you could not create a system more equitable for people who have the least than to have effectively a property tax, which is what rates are, and the fees and charges which carry GST, right? Both hardly progressive measures that help the least. And so we have a stacked deck against us on that. And central government will, play hard and fast where they'll want us to make more commitments in this space, but they won't provide the money to do so. Or we walk down the path with them on something and all of a sudden the funding gets pulled. Like I was telling you before about Titahi Bay Road, and there we need to have resilience built into that section of road on the harbour side. We need to, it's because it's a causeway for those who don't know, and we also need to provide multimodal transport options so that people can use it not just for cars but also for cycling, for walking, and so forth. Scootering, whatever. If you're in your mobility scooter, a safe pathway that can be used. Now, we had, walked down the path with Waka Kotahi, NZTA, and we were working towards getting that project finally done. And then the new government chopped $6 million out of the budget. And that means that project can't go forward. It is immensely frustrating to see that kind of stuff. And this is the kind of thing where central government, is not being part of the solution. They say focus on the basics. A road for most people is a bloody basic thing. And now we've got to play catch up. So to answer your question, now that I've got there, the local government New Zealand's talked about trying to introduce GST being given back from the rates back to the councils. And I have a nuanced view around this, because it actually, you might get more revenue, but it actually doesn't solve the problem around the council table. If a mall, like what we have in Porirua, has more customers going in it than it did a year ago, we don't receive any more in rates. If a house has more people in it or has fewer people in it, it doesn't matter. The house is still the house, the property value is still the property value. So when we are making decisions about whether this is actually going to grow the local economy, we can't, because the only people who benefit from a growing economy is central government. So actually what we should be thinking about is looking at those models that have been utilised overseas. Australia has I don't want to replicate the Australian system, but at least the principle of taking the pool of money from GST and then redirecting it back either on per capita or by some other allocation means that at least councils can say, okay, when we make a decision, we could at least see what that could mean in terms of increasing the GST take, which means we would increase our ability to actually gain revenue. Now, again, yep, it's a slightly better model because it will take pressure off the rates and broadening out your revenue sources. There are stuff around the bed tax and so forth, but that won't really apply for Porirua because we're not a huge tourist destination like Queenstown or Rotorua. So again, we don't have the levers in place because central government has chosen to make it convenient about it. And one last thing about this: whatever we do, whatever new revenue system we have, we still have to have social license. The people still have to be able to trust local councils, if they've been given these new funding tools, that they will respect that and use it wisely.
All right. Any more questions, Blake?
Yeah, you mentioned earlier about the council being one of the most transparent in the country, right? Well, being transparent. How do you hope to continue that when there's likely to be quite a bit of turnover in this election?
I think, I kind of look at it like this, right? You've got a garden and you've got a gardener, right? Now, the garden is only as good as the gardener. And so you're right. There is some, you're inevitably going to have people who are going to come on and off council. And I know one day I will no longer be on council. So you want to build institutions, you want to build rules, you want to build expectations that develop the culture and not the other way around, right? You know, when the council, when I was, again, pushing and advocating for them to change their workshops from being by default closed to being open by default is a big deal, right? Because what it means then is that the public have at least some idea of what you are doing. I use a phrase a lot, you know, at school, I kept being told, show you're working, show you're working. And so that's what this is all about. You know, it's about showing you're working, actually showing when workshops are on, you know, providing all of that information in advance so that people can also access it, so that they can participate in it. Having our council meetings on YouTube. And I apologise to anyone who can sit through some of those, because, you know, if you are looking for a great tool to make you fall asleep in the middle of the night, I think that probably would be, you know, listening to our council meetings. But in all seriousness, being able to show how these decisions are being made is a good way for us to be held accountable. Because in the end of the day, all I've got is my word and my vote.
What do you hope that some other councils around the region and the country take away from your council being more open than a lot of others right now? And two-part question. So the second part is, you guys are looking at doing some sort of referendum to amalgamate the councils. If so, why? Because there's a lot of controversy around that, and I want to get your take on that.
Yeah, I'm gonna answer the first bit really quick, because I think there's a real big that's a big tuck in for the second part, right? The first part is that people shouldn't feel uncomfortable with the idea of being more transparent in the process, right? I do want to protect staff and officers from abuse. That is important. We as elected representatives are going to get a bit of that, but I will not tolerate personal attacks on individuals because they've got no better arguments available to them. If these types of conversations were happening in the pub, no one would allow it, But social media, for all of its benefits, still allows that kind of behaviour to go unchecked, and that's not right. To the second part, people can go check what I've said on this issue around amalgamation. The referendum is actually, just so we're clear here, so everyone knows, the referendum is asking people, should we even start having that conversation about it? That's really what it is. It's not about, because we haven't had that conversation, and to do that costs vast amount of money and time. So, you would not want to go down the path without actually wanting to check that people thought that it was an important thing in the first place. Now, around the table, and I've been clear about it, and I've said it on the record, I am an amalgamation skeptic, because I think the arguments that have mostly been put up around economies of scale and the big gap in terms of the issues around representation and voice and mangai have not been satisfied to my liking. And I've got mates who live in Auckland who have been there pre and post Super City, who are anti-amalgamation, and now they're pro-amalgamation. But I also know that I can keep fighting in my corner on my skepticism, or I can trust he punga o te tangata, ngā tangata ne. I want to go back to the people. I think that's entirely fair to ask that question at this point in time, so that we don't waste more money on something which, in my view, at least, is not exactly the biggest priority for me right now for Porirua.
I ask that because the thing I find skeptical about amalgamation or councils is we already have a lot of struggles with the councils we already have on agreeing. The thing I worry about with council amalgamation is, I think that old phrase, too many cooks in the kitchen. That's my big concern if we have one big council.
And to be fair, it is also like there's an associated issue with that too, Black, right? It is that how do you ensure that you are gaining a strong mandate? Now, I've got a guy who lives down the street called Brendan. I mentioned him in a speech when I talked about this around the council table. And he said, if you look at the voter turnout rates of the super city after this amalgamation, the voter turnout didn't go up, went down. So again, the mechanisms that we have right now are very Western. They are built from legislation that is now 24 years old, and then prior to that was about 30 odd years before the legislation was amended prior to that, for the most part. So we are still dealing with, I think, 20th century tools to 21st century challenges of governance and accountability. And until we wrestle with that, and again, this comes back to my point about funding, we're going to have a deficit of trust. So let's fix those types of issues in concert, because then I think people will start to realize we can have some social license here. And maybe, the example I set with a water charter is a way to do that, is to start that conversation in broad terms.
And finally, do you hope to have more conversations on behalf of your council around these road issues you talked about earlier? Yeah.
Well, like you're a bloody good interviewer. Yeah, I do think so. We've got an annual plan, final debate in a couple of weeks' time. In there, the money for the Wineta Onipoto Shed pathway is not committed. We will still have to wrestle with that issue in the next triennium. And so this is going to be an ongoing issue. Half of our budget is supposed to be covered by central government. And right now, it is being cut away by our central government, which is just the audacity of a prime minister coming to a conference for a local government and then saying you need to do better, and then within this very same year cut the very funding for those kind of core services. What cheek? What bloody cheek?
And asked you to help with school attendance too.
Yeah, hang on. Like, and then being asked for us to champion that space. The funny thing is, we already do. We work with with partners within our social spaces, social service spaces, our NGOs, and most importantly, mana whenua, to be able to build a trusted relationship with people. But expecting local governments to do that without any additional funding, and then cut cut funding for what most people would say are the really important things for a council to do, again, shows just how inconsistent central government is right now in terms of actually being part of the solution.
Yeah, they don't
brings me to a really nice question that's popped up in the chat. That you might be able to give us a bit of perspective on. What potential negative impact could Seymour's regulatory standards bill have on council powers if it gets passed?
Gosh, how long have I got on this? So I wrote, you guys were talking before about submissions for the RSB. As somebody who's been through that process and submitted my one, it is a challenging topic, no doubt, Blake, but you need to put your pen to paper on this. This bill it's disappointing to see such bad legislation being proposed. It's just really bad in process, bad in rationale, and it's going to be bad for councils because you're going to have the ability of a minister to override decisions, whether it's on resource management, on town planning, on health and safety. And also just the complete absence of any language in there that acknowledges our relationship with mana whenua, a relationship with tangata whenua. The te tiriti is not there. And it is obvious why it's not there because of the ideological underpinnings of this document. It entrenches those who have the most to the detriment of those who have the least or do not have in their toolbox the ability to play a part in our Western democracy. Our natural environment doesn't vote. We're supposed to be part of looking after that. That's our responsibility as kaitiaki. And I would have expected the minister who has acknowledged his Māoritanga to understand that in a deep and personal level. The fact that they haven't is very disturbing to me.
I'm going to finish off then with a really simple question, which is nowhere near going to draw out the passion, but I love the passion. Have you ever played SimCity or City Skylines?
Oh, okay. I have. I am so far behind with all of the DLCs, and I have not got City Skylines 2. I think it's an awesome game, and it does, the computer models, right? So they're not life. They're not the perfect encapsulation of life. But what it does remind you is that it is a balancing act. Anytime you've been elected to office, I always think of this phrase by JFK: you are given two equally bad choices. You pick one, and you learn to live with the consequences of it. So whether you're building a city in a computer, or you're trying to serve a city as a representative of Kai Konahira, you need to be able to understand what the consequences of those actions are. I'll give you one last story. When we first moved to this house 10 years ago, and the rains came, I always get worried because this house would almost flood. The worst time was about a centimetre away from the water going into our house. And on that occasion, it didn't. And we were so grateful it didn't. But our neighbours around us weren't so lucky. And we tried to do what we could the next day, cups of tea and scones, and try and clean up the damage and do what we can. And that's what good neighbours and good communities and good whānau, me hapori do, right? That's what we do all the time. We look after each other. But a whānau, a hapori, a community, and individuals, as strong as we all are, we will never be as strong as if we have collective action as a city, which has the economies of scale and the ability to make those commitments to help make sure that the roads are well built, the pipes are capable, the entire network does its job. That's what it means for me in terms of running for office, because I need to know that the person who's there making that decision understands what the consequences are.
See, I just love the fact that they've got an elected official in Porirua who knows what to do if an alien attacks.
What a great place in the interview.
Absolutely. This has been amazing. Thank you so much, Geoff. We used to do SimCity in school for geography class. Like it was the teacher's lazy way of going, here, do this. But I've always wanted to, during a mayoral election, like recreate a city and get the mayors, the mayoral candidates, actually give it a go and see whether or not they can actually run the virtual city without it crashing and burning. But I just don't have the time to build a city like
I agree, Paul. I love doing that on Twitch. That'd be awesome. But most of the time with my mates, I'm actually playing cricket games because we try and rekindle what it's like to watch a cricket game when it's bloody cold outside. So
fair, very fair. Brilliant.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
See, I learned more about Porirua than I ever thought. The comments that have been coming through have been absolutely fantastic. Very, very supportive. Love how Geoff speaks. It's awesome to see.
How good was that?
It was really good. Really good. So while we're talking local body politics, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to give a preview for the documentary that I'm working on, since that's also about local body politics.
And then we'll go straight to Shanan after that. So we don't always run out of time.
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually a snippet that's about, I think, 10, 15 minutes into the documentary itself, looking really specifically at an astroturfing group down in the South Island. So let's get that one up and running. All 6 of his suggestions are groups run by Voices for Freedom local coordinators. Not that they'll tell you that, and they're all involved in local resident and ratepayer groups that they've set up, with Palmerston North and Whanganui predating Harris's group, and the others following after Harris showed them how he set up his group, which is why the naming conventions are different. In Canterbury, the Facebook page for concerned ratepayers has one video about the evils of fluoride and a bunch of "hey, come meet us at the market" posts. They only follow one quote-unquote artist, Reality Check Radio, and the pages they follow include the anti-rainbow hate group Let Kids Be Kids, the science disinformation groups NZDSOS and Fluoride Free NZ, pseudo-law group Common Law Assent, the conspiracy peddling South Island Independence Movement, New Zealand First, Matt King Northland, Better Wellington, Council Watch NZ and Mike Hosking Breakfast, who their spokesperson Diane is actually a regular caller to and encourages others within these groups to do the same through their Telegram channels, making comments like, "I'm not a Pākehā, I'm a New Zealander," and "It's New Zealand, not Aotearoa." And there's a range of local election candidates this group follow. Some have been known to push far-right content like Melbourne local board member and Wellington parliamentary siege attendee Shanan, but not everyone on their list is like this or share alt-right ideologies. Christchurch mayoral candidate Sarah Templeton, for example, is progressive and a strong advocate against gendered attacks on politicians, having been instrumental in the takedown of young National Party members in 2022 who were sending her and other female politicians threatening and harmful messaging. Messaging which has been increasing on her social media pages from the time Concerned Ratepayers Christchurch started following her campaign. These resident and ratepayer groups are being used as a Trojan horse to push specific perspectives built around hot-button issues. We can track their growth and spread and see common messaging, altered slightly to help them assimilate into local communities before building a base of followers who think of them as a legitimate concern group.
And
I should put you back on stage. There we go. Press all the right buttons.
And you can watch the full documentary on the 30th of June.
Yep, there'll be a premiere on YouTube. It'll be a specific YouTube premiere, and then I'll do a live Q&A session afterwards. There's so much, and that's just like a really short little clip. Really short. If people want to, if they stick around, I might show a second clip after Shannon if we've got time, or after the news before we go. But we'll worry about it then. In the meantime, we should probably jump over and check out Shannon's piece, shouldn't we?
You'll love this one, guys. It's really good. Vocational tertiary education has been in the spotlight recently after Penny Simmons passed her new legislation, but she's unwilling to show the data to back it up. Here to talk with us about it is Labour's spokesperson for that, as well as Rainbow Communities. Welcome, Shannon. It's a pleasure for you to be back on the program.
Kia ora, my friends. Good to see you, and thanks for having me.
So, how are you?
We're on a recess week this week, which is a good chance to get out and about with our communities. And I think sometimes when we're in Parliament, we get caught up on parliamentary political issues of the day, and it's a good test when we come back to our own community and see what's important for them. And I guess what they're still saying is, you politicians really need to focus on the things that are important to us. We don't think the government's doing that. So, that's our job.
In the intro, I mentioned about you're waiting to see the data that on this new legislation that's been put through. So what are you looking for?
This legislation has been long awaited. Minister Penny Simmons, it's well known that she's had a real vendetta against Te Pukenga. Te Pukenga was established under the Labour government to resolve particularly the financial viability issues that the sector has been challenged by for a long time. And we went through sort of a couple of years of bedding that in. Penny Simmons made a commitment in the election that she would disestablish Te Pukenga. And it's taken her, almost half the term to come back with an alternative piece of legislation. On the face value, it doesn't look too different to what's in place at the moment. And in my view, probably an unnecessary change to disestablish Te Pukenga. She probably could have just lifted and shifted a bunch of the functions, which would have had less impact to staff and students. And also, she's opted for what I believe is a more expensive model.
With these changes that she's looking at bringing in, what does it mean for the future of the sector and for students who'll be looking for potential vocational training in the future?
Well, what we've seen and what's being reported at the moment is a series of job cuts across the sector, particularly in polytechnics. We've seen that across Welltech and Whitireia, who service students in the Wellington area. We've seen that at EIT across Te Tairawhiti, Gisborne, and Hawke's Bay. And so it's more instability for the sector, really, which is the concerning part. Last week, I quizzed the minister about her, if she's worried about this, what she's going to do about the job losses that are being reported on. She said it's not her responsibility, it's the responsibility of the institution alone. That doesn't really demonstrate the leadership that I want to see for students and staff. They've gone through a really difficult period over the past couple of years. Her plan and legislation really kicks the can down the road now, and pushes it out for another couple of years before staff and students get that stability. So I'm worried about that.
In terms of that stability, you mentioned before the financial elements of it. I personally see vocational training in those kind of providers as a service, not a business. So it's not about turning a profit, it's about providing skills to increase productivity and increase workflows and increase workforces. The changes that are being proposed sound to me like they're driven by the idea that this is something that has to make money. Am I far off the mark on that?
You're pretty close, actually, and that's one of our major concerns, is it's a step towards greater privatisation of our public education system. That the minister does use the language that institutions are a business rather than polytechnics or institutes as we know of them. But, again, what underlies the problem here is that it's not the sector hasn't been financially viable for a long time. That's what we set out to resolve as a part of Te Pukenga. I understand that Te Pukenga is now running a surplus, which is everything we wanted it to achieve. And now the minister's coming in with an alternative plan, but she has refused to share the financial information available to her with myself, who's scrutinising the legislation. And she's removed that right of the public to be able to see, actually, if she's got a better plan, then she needs to provide all of the information, including the fiscals.
You mentioned that in your note that you sent us for this interview that the Pacifica and Maori population, as with many things in this country, are significantly undervalued when it comes to this area of society. What would you have to say about that in more depth?
Yeah, institutions are outraged by this decision that the minister has removed equity funding for Māori and Pacific learners in our education system. We know that they are the most underserved. It's a fact. It's a part of the Tertiary Education Commission's strategy. But for a long time, there's been investment in additional initiatives to support the pastoral care and the academic achievement of Māori and Pacific learners in our system. The minister has ignored all of the advice from officials and from institutions on this. There's no evidence to support the decision that she has made, and so that will result in worse outcomes for Māori and Pacific learners. That really bothers me because alongside that, she's erased references to Te Tiriti o Waitangi and Te Ao Māori within the legislation. They've done that also as part of the overall tertiary education strategy. So the ability for Māori and Pacific to learn in the way that's best for them isn't a good outcome, and she's got to be held accountable for that decision that she and her government has made.
I've got some stats here in front of me around this issue. The current unemployment rate's around 5.5%, I think 5.2, 5.3% for the general population, but the unemployment rate for Māori and Pacifica is sitting at around 10%, which was something that was predicted when the fair pay agreements were put through. If you don't have this is one of the outcomes that could look at happening. And of course, the government removed that. When we see the long-term effects of those kind of numbers, how does that impact communities when you go, well, look, the training opportunities aren't necessarily there, the money's better overseas. How does it impact the wider community, knowing that they've pulled these out specifically and said, no, we don't need them?
Yeah, we know when unemployment is high that tertiary enrolments are high too. And despite being given advice on this, the Minister hasn't responded, or in this year's budget hasn't put any additional funding in to fund tertiary training providers to educate those learners while they're out of work. So, here's another example where the Minister isn't looking for any advice. On top of that, over the past 3 years, year on year, we have 9,000 odd less apprentices coming into the system than we had under the Labour government. So that doesn't include, all of the tradies that have gone off to Australia. But year on year, we're losing $9,000. They cut the apprenticeship boost scheme. They've cut funding to the Māori and Pacific Trades Training Scheme. And so I just don't understand how we can grow tradies for a construction sector that desperately needs workers. Who is the government and the Minister listening to?
When COVID hit, I was working with a recruitment company that worked with engineers. And they were finding that they had this real problem with outreach in particular, because the people who work in that field are older. They've been working in it for years, and we weren't getting younger people coming through for that training. And they were really excited about the idea of that first year of free fees, because it's an enticement to get people coming through, and they were starting to see those numbers come through. That removal of that first year of fees free and putting it into the third year, I realize we probably don't have the data yet on how that impacts numbers because it's such a recent change. Have you had any feedback on the ground about what that impact is starting to look like?
Yeah, many students can't access tertiary education full stop because there's no support mechanisms to even get into the system in the first place. Shifting that to third year is, that's targeted to a different group, and that's a different argument. The reason why Labour put their first year fees free scheme in was about access. I still believe that that's required. And that we took a universal approach. This government doesn't like a targeted Māori and Pacific approach. So, I wonder why they don't support a universal approach. But also under this government is that they've enabled tertiary institutions to increase student fees up to 6%. So they're making it harder and harder in a cost of living crisis for students to access tertiary education, while there's high unemployment. And, we've got to be worried about that.
Do you mind if we switch over to your rainbow portfolio for a bit? Okay.
Yeah, no worries.
So earlier this week, we put out a thing on 4th page about the content attacks leading into the local government about, AstroTurf is coming out of the woodwork everywhere and pushing it. How disturbing is it to still see this happening on a day-to-day basis? And I know you happen to comment on the post that Paul put out.
Yeah, my heart always goes out to people from our rainbow communities who are wonderful advocates to many of our most vulnerable. And so whether that be Paul or, whether that be Jennifer from PATHA recently, that the hate that is being spread online, is not the Aotearoa New Zealand that I think many people believe, that we should be. Second to that is that, I do hold the government responsible for a lot of this behaviour. If we look at Winston Peters and his behaviour in the House against myself and Benjamin Doyle, that he really thrives on spreading hate to the rainbow community. So, leadership in this country, we believe, has got to be inclusive. It's based on New Zealand values, but that's not what I'm seeing in this country.
With the bump in the road I came across this week, it's driven very specifically by a group that is really, really anti-rainbow. That they are incredibly nasty people, and I stand by everything I said. I call them a hate group, and I don't see them in any other way. As the public, what can they do to show support for those people that might be impacted by this group that are out there cancelling school pride events, for example?
Yeah, I was particularly sad to see many of our schools cancel Pride because of the safety risks that they were presented with. My local college up the road, Northcote College, that they were another victim of online hate as a result of the Pride event that they held. What was really encouraging in that sense is that the community really stepped in, put their positive comments in there, and showed their support behind the school taking on this initiative, because schools have got to be inclusive places. All of our rangatahi need to know that they're accepted and loved for who they are, and that builds a strong community. I like to think that we can ignore the haters out there. I know that's easier said than done, but most of all, their hate needs to sit over there. The more that we can ignore it, which is my strategy with Woodston, is better. But we have one goal at the moment, and to be clear, we're only 6 odd months out from election year. Our one goal is to change this government, because the absolute punch down on rainbow communities, on Māori, on Pacific, on people with disabilities, on women, is not the Aotearoa New Zealand that we believe in. And that narrative and the discussions in the local supermarket and out on the street, people are really rethinking about this government and where we should go from here.
I mean, I tend to ignore the hate when people, because I know it's not true, when people come up to me, because I know it's all at risk of being in the public eye nowadays, of saying, that people are taking advantage of you, this person taking advantage of you, don't listen, they're brainwashing you and all that kind of thing. So do you think this is the most under pressure our disabled and rainbow communities have ever been?
Well, my biggest concern in this hate is the use of predatory language upon the rainbow community. That's hurtful, it's not accurate, it takes away the relationships that we have with our children and our whānau, and quite often it's put up on social media. Compare the levels of abuse from the rainbow community between churches, and it speaks for itself. There are no concerns there. That as rainbow people, we have the right to love our family, to engage with our tamariki in the normal ways that any family in Aotearoa does. And so that hate and that particular language is just awful and unnecessary. And I'd like to see a little bit more leadership from the government calling that language out, not encouraging it.
So as we speak, I've actually just been getting text messages here from a medical practice in Wellington. Anti-trans protesters have raided a doctor's surgery down there. And the police have been called in because they've gone into the surgery. They're starting to harass the staff and the people that are there, which is obviously a step too far. That is, that's a dangerous thing for them to do. How do we juggle free speech requirements versus hate speech? Because this is something that the government has very specifically said they don't want to touch. It was something that Labour was trying to look at and then got a lot of pressure on. How do we have those conversations around those differences and the harms that they can cause?
Yeah. Well, let's be clear. Free speech is not hate speech. The moment that your discussion, your opinions are becoming hateful and are impacting on others and shedding and positioning people in a negative light, that is hate speech. That's not your free speech opinion. And the second part is about where you share your free speech. And if you expect to speak negatively of any particular group, including the rainbow community, in a public way, then that can easily cross that line to become hate speech. rather than just your free speech. If you're in your house, you're sharing opinions over the kitchen table, that's all up to you, and that's within your own private environment. But the moment that it impacts on others, then it becomes concerning, and that's when we must stand up against it.
The fact that they're coming after me is quite disturbing, but it's all part of being in the public eye, I suppose.
That's right. We all, take the odd hit because of who we are and the lives that we lead, chosen or not. But this is where we normally expect a government to stand up on every New Zealander's behalf, to build a society, that is safe for everyone. And that's just not the leadership that I've seen from Prime Minister Luxon, particularly Winston Peters when he was the Deputy Prime Minister, but this government overall.
What I would say, if they continue to bring up these issues in the House, even if they are falling on deaf ears, because we need more advocates to join us like yourself. So, please.
Yeah, that's right. But also alongside that, we've got to maintain our focus on the things that are important to our rainbow communities. And we come back to, again, for Labour, it's jobs, health and homes, that we can't lose sight of the bread and butter issues that are important on a day-to-day basis. This government promised respite from cost of living. They haven't achieved that. That is still top of mind for every single person in this country.
Let's briefly finish with...
I was going to say, I was at Countdown yesterday. I bought butter yesterday. I don't do a lot of baking or anything like that, but I bought it because it was under $9 a block. And it's like, this is, have to.
It's a bargain.
Which is ridiculous in a dairy producing country.
I was going to say, let's briefly finish it, because you've been at the farmers convention the last few days as we're recording this. So how's that been? Because there's a real focus on getting woolen carpets into homes and all that kind of stuff. So what did you see when you were down there?
That's right. I had a great day down at Field Days at Mystery Creek. I met lots of people. I was particularly interested in talking about the vocational training legislation, because we know that we need to grow thousands of future farmers for our workforce, given the GDP contribution to our economy. And we're not quite meeting the number of farmers that New Zealand needs to train year on year. It's quite clear that farmers don't tend to vote for the Labour Party. That's okay. But it is important that we maintain a relationship with them, because when we do get back into government, we've got to work together, no matter who you voted for. And that's something that we believe fundamentally as a Labour Party caucus, that when you govern for everyone. That's not the style of leadership that we've seen from this government, but certainly the government that we want to be.
Free News reported that the support for the Labour Party is around 3% at the moment.
With farmers.
With farmers. So how do you...
I should point out, actually, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, that research that they did into that was only with farm owners and managers. It wasn't actually with the farmers who are working out there. So it's obviously a very heavily skewed towards federated farmers who paid for the research. But yeah, it's been put out there in the media as this is normal. This is actual information where it's heavily skewed.
I'm just going to say, how do we get that up?
Yeah, as I said, that traditionally farmers, particularly farm managers, are unlikely to vote for Labour. They tend to go more conservatively to national. But, farmers are important to Labour. We know we need to have a working relationship with them. They're an important part of our economy. And, so we've got to maintain that relationship outside of election years, because when we are government, we want to work together on the things that are important to get New Zealand's economy going.
Any other bit before we go, Paul?
One final question. Do you know what the mystery of Mystery Creek is?
It was my first visit to Mystery Creek, and they didn't tell me what the mystery is.
So I should just leave this open-ended and see if the chat can get it. It's a mystery. Nobody actually knows exactly where the name came from, and there's like 4 or 5 different theories around it, including lost treasure, like lost stolen treasure from the 1800s, a whole bunch of buried planes from World War II. There's a whole bunch of different rumors about what the actual mystery of Mystery Creek is, which makes it a mystery. It's a weird little historical fact for everyone.
Good to know.
Right, that's it. I should have done a sign-off thing, and I didn't, and it's just been one of those days. So, I'll give you your microphone back as well, so you can talk now.
I enjoyed doing that. It's always great to catch up with Shannon, either in person or on the web.
It is. We're going to be neighbours soon. He's moving up the road by like a kilometre away from here, so it'll be great to have a new neighbour.
Wait. Did you work out it was closer than you thought it was?
Oh no, I know where it is. I know where the road that he's moving to. So yeah, I sort of know in my head what the distance is.
Oh
so,
yeah.
Yes. Right. So that we make sure that we have enough time to get through everything, should we just jump straight into the news?
Yeah, we'll be back after the news.
All right. Better make sure I've got the right one there. Yeah, that's the news there. In this week's episode, the Workplace Relations Minister is okay if you take a fall. A shake-up where they monitor earthquakes. Nothing to see here, says Finance Minister, and the most popular future destination of the country revealed. All that and more in this week's The News. Hello there, kia ora. I'm Paul, and next week this will have been last week's This Week's The News. It was revealed this week that the reasons behind Reserve Bank Governor Adrian Orr's sudden resignation back in March, seen here discovering he has a meeting at the Beehive he didn't realise was in his calendar, were down to conflicts with the Finance Minister over funding for the bank. At the time, Board Chair Neil Quigley had said it was for personal reasons, which Orr has backed up, saying, "I find doing everything in their power to tank the economy pretty damned personal." A ministerial advisory group has warned that corruption and insider trading threats are increasing in New Zealand, adding that the country was poorly prepared for it. The report defined corruption as the abuse of access or authority to advance objectives of organised crime. Said Police Minister Casey Costello, seen here daydreaming about her work with Hobson's Pledge and how much satisfaction she got from treading down on Māori. "We know there's an international trend of this increasing, and we feel the best way to tackle it is to only allow people to access MPs if they're part of a secretive group of lobbyists, like the tobacco industry or international mining companies. That way it's not illegal corruption, just the good old-fashioned legal kind." Official figures from the Ministry of Justice released this week show a projected increase of 35% for the country's prison population by 2035. Driven by the return of the 3 strikes law, sentencing caps and more aggravating factors in sentencing, the projections would see an increased population in prisons of around 12,000 people, said Corrections Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here trying to do a sexy lip-biting scene in the world's worst rom-com. "I believe we will have the capacity to handle this because being tough on criminals always works when you ignore the drivers of crime." A new report from Oranga Tamariki has shown that Māori children are overrepresented in being let down, with Māori adults who have been through the system having higher mortality rates than those who aren't Māori. Those who have been in care were also 9 times more likely to need emergency housing support and half as likely to be able to find long-term employment, said Children's Minister Karen Chow, seen here trying to live, laugh and let kids be hit in boot camps. "It's a sobering report. We all want the best outcomes for these kids, and while we may have removed that specific legislation that allowed that to happen, that was delivering the results that we now say that we want, I guess the cause behind this will forever be a mystery." GNZ Science is asking for voluntary redundancies from its 24/7 geohazard monitoring team in a drive to pay for landlord tax cuts, which may result in the centre, which provides around-the-clock detection services of tsunamis, earthquakes, landslides and eruptions, no longer being staffed at all times, said Civil Defence Minister Mark Mitchell, seen here trying to show you what a tornado sounds like. "We're sure the geological fault lines that the country is built on will understand that they can only move during office hours, and everyone knows that tsunamis don't hit at night." A youth hikoi is to be held in Auckland this weekend to raise awareness of the number of young people currently experiencing homelessness, some as young as 11 years old, according to advocates. The latest data shows Auckland has seen a 53% increase in people sleeping rough between September and January, and reports have emerged that people fleeing domestic violence are being turned away from emergency housing at WINZ for contributing to their situation. Said the Prime Minister, seen here in an earthquake that remembered to hit during office hours, "Look, what I'm saying to you is, there is no evidence that I've wanted to see or allowed in my office that shows our policies and punitive approach to welfare has anything to do with why 11-year-olds are sleeping rough. Why don't you focus on those Kiwis who actually work hard to become billionaires instead? They're good people who deserve our admiration a lot more than some homeless kids." The ACT Party is set to announce its list of candidates for the upcoming local body elections shortly, saying that the process of selection is now complete. David Seymour, seen here with his former advisor on how to select people, has said that they will stand on a range of policies which include fucking over the environment, fucking over Māori, and sucking any joy from communities. "We really wanted these candidates to embody everything about the ACT Party," Seymour said, and I'm sure voters will understand that when they see ACT on their voting forms, that they will have a choice. An AI video of Nelson District Councillor Campbell Rollo, seen here standing between Nelson's tallest buildings, has sparked warnings about the use of AI and spread of disinformation in this year's local body elections. The video used Rollo's likeness and had him using an automatic weapon, and was watermarked with an AI video producer logo. Said experts on the topic, "We can expect to find more of this kind of disinformation as these groups discover the height of 2022 technology on their phones, and since some of them can't read but believe what they're told is on Facebook, they could have a major impact on how campaigns are run this election. Our advice? Ignore what you see on Facebook and get out and meet the candidates directly." ACC has warned Workplace Relations Minister Brooke Van Velden, seen here waiting to see what happens when you remove the wet floor sign, that her proposed changes to health and safety laws will result in higher payouts and an increase in musculoskeletal injuries, slips, trips and falls, as well as higher levies for businesses, and concerns raised by the families of those lost on the Pike River mine collapse of 2010 that the changes will result in more deaths. Said Van Velden of the report, "Yeah, but they're just workers, who cares if they're safe?" The Taxpayer Union this week released two polls, one a general poll and the other looking at which political parties farm owners and managers support. Their polling company, Curia, which is no longer part of political polling regulatory agencies, released the figures to widespread mainstream media coverage, with one producer stating, "Remember when Orson Welles read War of the Worlds and everyone thought it was real even though it was a piece of fiction? We like to think of Curia polling along the same veins." Prime Minister Christopher Luxon, seen here going to complain that his new airline doesn't serve little cookies like his old airline, is off on another international trip, visiting Europe and China with plans to meet China's Xi Jinping. Said a spokesperson for the Prime Minister's office, "These groups represent some of our biggest trading partners, so we know Kiwis will understand that in a cost of living crisis when cheese costs $20 a block, that we need to keep giving a wealthy and sorted former CEO free trips all over the world." The inter-island ferry Aratiri was forced to stop mid-transit this week as an electrical fault caused unexpected issues with the propulsion drive while sailing. The ship itself is slated for retirement in August this year, just in time for the ferry replacements to arrive, give or take half a decade. Said Finance Minister Nicola No-Boats-Willis, seen here telling scary stories by torchlight about how she was forced to not buy her kids Ben & Jerry's at the movies. "I don't see a problem here. I mean, the ship was in the Cook Strait at the time, and I can't see it from my office, so I literally couldn't see the problem." Hastings District Council has removed videos on Māori wards after legal threats from that group your racist uncle keeps posting to on Facebook, Hobson's Pledge. In their complaint letter, the group pointed out that a 2004 legal case meant that councils could not promote a preferred stance on an issue which could influence voter decisions. And since the government is forcing councils to hold referenda on retaining Māori wards this year at huge expense, Hobson's Pledge felt it was best to support free speech on the topic by demanding the council stay quiet. Said a spokesperson for the group, "These videos are coming at the expense of ratepayers in the area, which is unfair. I mean, not as unfair as forcing ratepayers to foot the bill on the referendum that they didn't want or ask for, which will cost a lot more than a couple of cheaply made in-house video pieces. But we don't make the rules, only enforce them when Māori look to be getting onto any kind of even playing field with non-Māori." NBR this week released its most recent rich list, which showed that the wealth of individuals had increased almost exactly as much as the savings made by punishing poor people and beneficiaries. Said the Prime Minister, seen here realising that since the rich got richer, his party donations this year will be huge. "What I'm saying to you is, these are hard-working individuals that we should all be proud of. Well, hard enough working to know that they can make lots of profit in Chinese sweatshops and proud of how they supported the US tariff policies, which has been detrimental to worldwide economies, including ours. But they're rich, so we don't say bad things about them. And if the paws don't learn a lesson or two from them, we may be forced to punch down even harder on them. More staffing cuts are being proposed at the Ministry of Culture and Heritage to pay for those landlord tax cuts and tobacco kickbacks. This time, historians and staff who create educational content used by both schools and the public is in the firing line. Said an expert from the organisation, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, and those who choose to do what people can learn from history, well, you know what? Not our problem anymore, but there will be some epic musicals written about it in the future. Something about hearing the people sing? And finally, Hamilton is once again playing host to the largest agricultural showcase in the Southern Hemisphere as the Field Days kick off at Mystery Creek. The event pumps over $200 million into the Waikato economy, and with changes to this year's budget, which allows farmers to buy equipment that the government pays for as part of its business boost plan, sales are expected to be booming. The arrival of the event also heralds some other knock-on effects to the region, including a number of schools having teacher-only days because David Seymour doesn't mind kids missing school if they're children of party donors, an increase in patronage to the city's strip clubs, brothels, gay sauna and fast food joints, and until this year, an increased visible presence of homelessness on the streets as they were forced out of emergency housing and hotels for farmers to be accommodated. Said Associate Housing Minister and Hamilton West MP Tama Potaka, seen here showing what he means by lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, we got the balance right on homelessness this year by preemptively kicking people out of emergency housing before the event and then refusing to let them return this time round. And that is this week's The News. Thanks again for all the support this week, and we'll catch you next time. Yay, the news. Do you want to watch another clip? Or should we just leave it?
Up to you.
I'm going to find it. It's like a 90-second clip, so it's not going to make people late for BHN. Let's see. Where did I put it? That clip there, because it should pop up as soon as I hit this button. Should.
I think it is very good to target.
Let's start that again.
I think it is very good to target councils to build profile and presence so that we can then take it forward into central government, because if we get the numbers, we can start to exert more control.
There's already a number of local elected members involved with links to groups like Voices for Freedom, New Zealand First, Hobson's Pledge, New Zealand Loyal. In their current roles, they've worked to highlight the issues they consider important, not issues and decisions that necessarily create stronger, better communities. They have a habit of voting against climate change mitigation, transport safety initiatives, Māori rights and representation. They focus on division, they drive disinformation. Their supporters are behind the rise in reports of violent action towards council staff all over the country. And on October 11, they want more seats at the decision-making table, but maybe not for the reasons that they tell you.
It does go back to the World Economic Forum, where there is interconnectedness of these groups, and the conspiracy is real.
The conspiracy is real. So, yeah. Because we're not doing a show on Friday because of Matariki, I'm going to release a full trailer then for people to look at. But do you want to tell people about our show next Saturday?
We might be having one. It's had a snag. Remember?
Oh, okay. In that case, we might not be here next Saturday either and just enjoying a really long weekend, which I guess we'll just have to wait and see what happens.
But if it does come to fruition, it's somebody very special. But, yeah.
We'll see. We'll interview and see what happens.
Yeah. Now that's a cliffhanger. Enjoy. See you next time.
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, definitely. Right, I'm going to sign off and go and help my son move house because apparently I've got nothing better to do with my time at 9 o'clock on a Friday night. Need to thank Geoff and Shannon for tonight's episode. It's fantastic having them here. And we will maybe see people next week. Maybe. maybe.
Yeah.
All right, I'll hit the button.
Bye.